Folks, we're back on the Kojo main YouTube channel. Hope you're all having a nice day out there wherever you are. Trial by Frost is here. There are countless new cards and new archetypes to try out, but you know I would not be on this channel if I didn't make a beeline to our boy, the one and only. So here I am presenting to you a really cool new style of playing for Kojo. As a matter of fact, in case you missed it, with Trial by Frost, most of the top tier decks of the altered metagame have just received significant nerfs, including Traced, including Sigismar, and including Waru. So if there was ever a time to go out and try some new underutilized archetypes, it's now, folks. And this deck definitely fits this description. Now, what is this deck about? I've called it Bravos Anime Protagonists because, honestly, that's what we're playing. What's an anime protagonist, you ask? Well, Wukong is one, and I don't say that because he's Asian. Wukong gets boosts and loses fleeting when he comes in from reserve, so he wants you to play him over and over. Heck, you could even just basically play only Wukong every round. He's not just some side performer, he's the main attraction, the main character of this show, the anime protagonist. Now, he's not alone. We also got Mulan, another badass card we didn't get to play much before, and incidentally also from Asian mythology. And guess what? In Trial by Frost, we got a new guy just like that. Garrick, also with massive main character energy, who was busy studying the blade while we were playing Beyond the Gates. So when I saw this trifecta of anime protagonists, I just knew I had to make a deck. But there's actually another, more down-to-earth, more serious reason. We're playing around the new Bravos landmark, Icebound Peak. Now this card does not fool around, guys. Play a couple of characters with fleeting to get counters and then flip this into a massive 5/5/5 dragon. Except, it's not just a 5/5/5 dragon because it also pumps your entire team. So it's actually closer to 7 or 8 power. Over the past week, I've worked night and day testing all sorts of Bravos decks to find a home for this, and it wasn't easy, but eventually the pieces all fell into place because it turns out our trio of main characters works really well with this. Now, I'm sad to say that some of the new cards didn't turn out as useful as I had hoped, like Fire Rabbit, or the Technical Boots, or even my preview card, Bravos Rescuer. But at the same time, I'm absolutely delighted to get a chance to play Wukong and especially Mulan, who I've been trying to find a home for ever since I started playing because I really love the card. Now, let me introduce the deck list, as usual without any uniques, so that you can just pick it up and play with it if you like to try it out. Now, I can already hear some of you guys saying, "But the Kojo main! This is just some random pile of cards! Where are all the cool new Trial by Frost characters? And why did you downgrade Garrick?" You're mistaken! This is the result of lots and lots of test playing, and there is a hidden system to these cards that might not be apparent at first glance. So let me rearrange this deck list a bit, and then I'll walk you through it. You see, Icebound Peak, and actually most of Bravos in Trial by Frost, wants you to play around the fleeting status. But there are two fundamental problems. On one hand, playing characters like Bravos Tracer or Fire Rabbit who enter fleeting, or making your characters enter fleeting with the new Arcolano Milk, is absolute poison to your card economy. You never have a reserve, your hand is constantly empty, you'll be uncomfortable the entire game and then you lose, because you're using your cards once and the opponent uses them twice. Secondly, and this goes hand in hand with it really, the payoff is not good enough. Bravos Tracer, who you only get to play once instead of twice like every other character, does not have double the power. Same goes for Arcolano Milk. One measly boost in exchange for fleeting is not enough. It's a similar problem as with the big top-end cards in some of the colors. Looking at you, Izmir. So if you want to play around fleeting, you have to be very clever about it. And you need to not play any characters that suddenly suck after taking one sip of the Arcolano Milk. Now, the characters I came up with that fit this description come in 3 types. On the left, you have the utility characters, who were already weak in the first place, who you play because they sabotage. For Bravos, that's Tooth Fairy and Haven Bouncer. Both of these characters do not give a hoot about getting fleeting from your Arcolano Milk, because by the time they first hit the board, they've already done what you needed them to do. Sabotage with their Enter the Battlefield trigger. So that's fine, you can play these. The second group, in the middle, Here are characters who just naturally don't care about getting fleeting handed to them. Or in some cases, they even specifically enjoy it. We've got Bravos Tracer, who already has fleeting by itself. And 3 new cards from the new set. Bravos Trailblazer, who gets a boost if you control a fleeting character, which does include itself. Haven Seringar, in my eyes one of the most impressive new commons for Bravos, who lets you draw a card when he leaves the board fleeting. So even if you just get to play him once, he refunds himself in your hand immediately. And of course our boy Garrick, whom I'm playing at common in this version, but even then he's just fine. Getting boosts every time he gets fleeting, and he can get fleeting multiple times. So play him from the reserve, he gets fleeting, he also gets fleeting from the Arcolano Milk that's already there, 2 boosts. And finally, on the right, we have our 2 playmakers, Mulan and Wukong. Both of these characters remove fleeting from themselves when they enter from reserve. So they don't only fix your card economy problem by letting you replay them indefinitely, they also work with both Arcolano Milk and Icebound Peak. You'll play one of these from reserve, and then you order the triggers such that they'll get fleeting from being played out of reserve, which triggers Icebound Peak. They'll also get the boost from Arcolano Milk, together with another instance of fleeting, which just disappears because they're already fleeting. And then they'll unfleet themselves so that they're sitting there with all of the benefits, but none of the drawbacks. And by the way, they also naturally protect themselves from Cloth Cocoon, which is basically Lyra's and Muna's best removal spell. So these 2 are the cards that we want to play around. Now on the far right, we have all our non-characters. I'm not blown away by having to play Intimidation, honestly, so I would say you could swap that out for Bravos Pathfinder or for any uniques you might have for this deck. As always, Mana Eruption would really benefit from the rare upgrade, so if you find a way to replace Tooth Fairy with something else, that's where I would put the rare slots. Now the deck as you see it here is what I'm playing for the first game. And then for the second game, I made some slight changes to show a couple of other card options as well. But that's enough for introductions. Let's hop into the games and see how our anime protagonists can handle the Trial by Frost meta. Okay, our opponent for the first game is Gulrang, and she is another hero that might not have been played much in Beyond the Gates, but her toolkit received some absolutely bonkers upgrades in Trial by Frost, which are only slightly dampened by the fact that she too, like Sigismar, was hit by the recent ban of Ozma. Still, she is scary when she takes off, very scary, so I'm hoping for a slow start on her part and for us to be able to close out the game before she gets out of control, because the removal in our deck is honestly not very good at all, so here's to hoping. Our opening hand looks great though. We've drawn both of our landmarks. The only problem is that we don't have a way to use all our mana on turn 1, with our entire hand costing 2 mana per card. Bravos Tracer is strong for snatching a progression on the first turn, but with us putting 2 landmarks into play soon, I was already worried about card economy, so I went with Mulan to have something to repeatedly play. Being the starting player, we also get the Buddha token, so with Mulan we're contesting both expeditions pretty significantly. Unfortunately for us, Gulrang hits us immediately with one of her strongest new cards, Mobile Armory in the rare version, which costs just 1 mana and creates a 1/1/1 recruit, which, as you know, gets boosted from Gulrang and receives Defender, but Mobile Armory also has an additional ability that allows characters in this expedition to progress even if they have Defender. So this 1 mana floating house actually beats our Hua Mulan here with 2/2/2 versus 1/2/2. It's honestly good for us that she didn't have anything for the companion expedition here with the remaining 2 mana, because otherwise this first round would have been an absolute embarrassment for the Bravos folks against this floating house. As things stand, we trade expeditions evenly with 1 progression for either player. And here you see what the new Gulrang is all about, progressing early even though you're not supposed to. Going into round 2, we've drawn a second Icebound Peak, and although this landmark has a bit of a built-in duplicate protection because it eventually sacrifices itself, meaning that having multiples in your hand is not entirely awful, in this spot it's a reasonable bench. Intimidation is normally thought of as quite weak, but in this matchup it might be pretty decent honestly, because you can target Gulrang's hyper-boosted tokens, and they'll just be straight up destroyed because they're tokens, so I wanted to keep it here. Our opponent runs out the Mobile Armory again right away, and this 2/2/2 is bigger than our Mulan, but not bigger than Haven-boosted Mulan. So I play our Haven here and resupply an Arcolano Milk. One of the more talked about cards of the new set, I would say. We mentioned it in the deck introduction, and as I said, the synergy with Mulan and soon Wukong is very nice. For her remaining 3 mana, Gulrang showcases yet another very strong card from her Trial by Frost kit, Sunisa, Dedicated Ensign. You might know this card from one of my previous videos. She's a strong defender character that makes her expedition lose defender if it's behind. So in this board state, she's actually a straight up 3 mana 4/4/4 that we honestly just can't deal with. So our only play is to run out Mulan here as planned, resulting in another even trade of expeditions once again, since this Sunisa just scores the companion expedition on her own. I won't lie, people, it doesn't feel good to be tied with Gulrang after 2 rounds when you play an aggro deck. But that's a big part of why her toolkit got so much better. She now has a much easier time scoring progressions even before getting to her 8 mana threshold. For round 4, where we get our Buddha token once again, we've drawn Gerect and Tracer. This gives us a whole lot of options, and it's hard to say what to go for here. Trying to get this Icebound Peak into play definitely sounds like a good idea, as it will get counters from us playing Mulan again and again, and also from the Tracer. We will have 5 mana, so in the end I aimed for something like Icebound Peak plus Arcolano Milk plus Mulan, which means we get rid of Gerect here. By the way, one interaction you might not have thought about is between Arcolano Milk and Buddha. Since this milk is a gear permanent and stays in the expedition as long as you don't progress, you can play it in the rounds where you're not the starting player, and then have your Buddha token benefit from it the next round. In this case though, we're obviously too late for that, but it will still be able to buff our Mulan, while conveniently passing the turn to our opponent for just 1 mana. They showcase another new Gulrang card here, which is one I'm very excited about myself, Field Reinforcements, which either draws a card or creates a recruit, but when both of your expeditions are behind or tied, it does both, making it very, very good, especially for Gulrang. The or tied part is extremely relevant. You can even play this on turn 1 and get both effects. Now that the companion expedition is tied, we have some incentive to skip playing Icebound Peak and instead go for Tracer plus Mulan, which would allow us to contest both sides here, but it would be a very short-sighted attempt, since our opponent still has enough mana for the Sunisa or for any other play from their hand, shutting down at least one of these expeditions. So it's probably smarter to go for Icebound Peak and then try to snatch at least one of the expeditions at the end of the round with Mulan. Now we get into an interesting situation here, because they play Ratatoskr, still with 2 mana open. Keep in mind that both hero expeditions only need Mountain right now. So with Mulan providing 2 plus 1 from the Arcolano Milk plus another one from Haven, I'm pretty confident that we can win the left side against whatever they might still have. And I suppose I was right in a way, but their play turns out to be another mobile armory here for the companion expedition. Not only overpowering our Buddha, but also once again adding the ability to progress even with Defender. Which means that all in all, even this 3rd round is again another even 1-for-1 trade between our aggressive Bravos deck and the Gulrang deck that's supposedly unable to progress at all before round 6. Needless to say, I'm not very comfortable with our lack of a lead in this game. But on the bright side, our opponent has to discard twice from reserve here, keeping only the Ratatoskr and the Floating House. We're seeing Wukong and another Haven for our draws. Our landmark slots are both already filled, but keep in mind that we only need 2 more instances of fleeting to flip this Icebound Peak, which will happen with just 1 more Mulan play and with this Bravos Tracer. So it seems reasonable to hold on to this second Haven. I'm benching the Intimidation instead, and as one might have expected, the opening play from our opponent here is the Mobile Armory from reserve. I'm tentatively contesting that side with Mulan for now. This round is very explosive for us, since we can trigger the Icebound Peak now, giving us a huge power spike, so I'm definitely trying to push for at least 1 progression here. Now our opponent pulls out one of the biggest guns she has with Open the Gates, creating 2 boosted recruits on each side. But on second glance, this is actually very good for us. I was worried they might use their remaining 5 mana to put a Monolith into play, but without the landmark support Gulrang likes to have, these recruits are actually not as menacing as they seem at first. We can win both expeditions here by playing out Bravos Tracer to the left, which initially is just a tie, but this puts our 3rd counter on the Icebound Peak, meaning it sacrifices itself, creating its massive 5/5/5 dragon token for the right side and also, importantly, putting a boost on each character we control. With that, we pull ahead on both expeditions, and after Gulrang naturally passes, we even have 2 mana to spare for the second Bravos Bastion. Resupplying a Tooth Fairy seems pretty useless, But overall, this is the kind of turn we were looking for. An explosive double progression off the back of this Icebound Peak flipping, and this is something you're looking to pull off with Icebound Peak in every game if you can. Either pushing ahead to get into that very desirable position where you only need to trade in order to win, or even close out the game entirely. Now, we are in a very favorable spot, and fortunately, Gulrang has not found any of her landmarks yet, which are pretty essential to her game. We draw Garrick and Seyringar here, and even though I really like Seyringar in general, I'm benching it here to make space for our big beaters. Leading with Tooth Fairy here seems reasonable. Normally that character is extremely weak from reserve, but thanks to the 2 Havens we have in play, it's actually a respectable 3/3/3 here. Gulrang's first play is pretty naturally the Ratatoskr. I'm not sure she even calculated to be able to play that, given that Bravos is somewhat sabotage heavy. It only ties with our expeditions on the companion side though. So I add our trusty Huamulan for an additional 4 water strength. These 2 copies of Haven are really making their influence felt in this board state, and in general they play so nicely with our Sun Wukong and especially Mulan, whose stats are sadly quite low normally. Now, our opponent is apparently in a very difficult position. Their best option seems to be to play an Ordis Overseer to the Hero Expedition. Another nice new card that fills a common slot for Gulrang. But in this situation, it wouldn't have been enough power to contest our companion expedition, so instead, our opponent is trying to preemptively defend on the left, and it was a very good choice too. If we had been able to win that side with Garrick, the game would have been over. But now there's no point in playing him there. Keep in mind that Gulrang's Hero Expedition can't progress, since it includes a token and she's not at 8 mana yet. Instead, I decided to add Sun Wukong to the right side here, just to make absolutely sure we win it, and also to make him go to our reserve, since he's naturally much stronger from reserve than from hand. That plan works, and we score a progression to put us at match point now for this upcoming 6th round. Bravos Tracer and especially Tooth Fairy look nice as our draws, and I calculated that if I bench Garrick here, we have the options of either playing Wukong plus Mulan or Tooth Fairy plus Wukong plus Tracer. Open the Gates doesn't actually look too strong here for our opponent, since we only need 1 progression, so we can focus everything on one side and ignore the recruits on the other side. But it looks like our opponent has no other choice at this point. I put Huamulan on the left side, which forces out a response, and as it turns out, there was no surprise tool left in our opponent's hand. They just play the Ordis Overseer, and that enables us to take the companion side with Wukong. He comes into play with an incredible 4 boosts thanks to the Havens, making him a 6/8/6 and a fitting final play to close out this game. GG. Now, for the second game, as I mentioned, I made some slight changes to the deck list because I wanted to try another card that I haven't gotten to play much yet, but which looks really good. It's Twinkle Twinkle, coming from Lyra as an out of faction. This is our version of Beauty Sleep that can also act as cost reduction from reserve. But in order to fit this into the deck, in place of Mana Eruption, we also had to downgrade one of the rares. And I went with downgrading Huamulan, which is a considerable price to pay. So we'll see how it goes. Our opponent for this round is Akesha, who is no doubt trying out the new playstyle for Izmir from Trial by Frost, centered around exhausting cards in reserve. Akesha was already a good deck before, thanks to her ability to zigzag. If you haven't already, do check out my video I made on that deck. So let's see what she can do with the new upgrades. We love to see Sun Wukong and Icebound Peak both in our opening hand. Those 2 cards are probably the most central pieces to our strategy with this deck, and the new Arcolano Milk plays well with both, so I decided to keep those 3 cards. With this setup, we can either play Wukong on turn 1, or if we're feeling adventurous, sitting out the first round and going with Icebound Peak plus Milk for the companion side is also a very promising idea, because keep in mind, the Milk would stay in play and trigger on our Buddha token next round. So it would already give us a boost and the first counter towards flipping Icebound Peak. With our opponent being Akesha, she naturally uses her After You ability, so unfortunately we have no information about what she's planning here. But I decided to still go for it and not play our Wukong yet. I felt the chances of her having the necessary cards to take both expeditions here were very small, since you would basically need 1 2-mana character and 1 1-mana character, right? And I don't think Akesha plays many of the latter. Indeed, she just runs out Baba Yaga, meaning that even though I didn't play any characters this round, we only concede 1 progression, which is good, relatively speaking. However, do keep in mind that Akesha specializes in trading expeditions, so her being ahead on the expedition track is actually very dangerous, and probably what she considers a best case scenario. Our new draws are Icebound Peak and the Twinkle Twinkle I just put in before the game. Sadly, it's more of a mid to late game card, so I'm benching it here, which leaves us with a slightly unfortunate mana situation where we can't use all of our mana completely this round. We do, however, get the Buddha token, and as I mentioned before, it gets fleeting and a boost from the Arcolano milk. I guess it's true that cats really do love milk after all. We don't have many options here, and playing the second peak would be too passive, so I play Sun Wukong on the Hero Expedition, and hopefully our opponent respects the 1 mana we have left open. They respond with playing their Baba Yaga there, which isn't enough against Wukong by itself, so we basically already know they do have something else. But I can only pass and watch while Akesha uses Off You Go to send Wukong to reserve. That's not a worst case scenario, since he wants to be in reserve anyway, but it does mean that this round is an even trade of expeditions in the classic Akesha zigzag fashion. Another Twinkle Twinkle and a Tooth Fairy are our next draws. Tooth Fairy looking moderately helpful against that Off You Go, so I'm benching Twinkle Twinkle here again, and so far we haven't really gotten anything out of this new rare that I added to the deck, sadly. Akesha starts with After You, as usual, and since Wukong costs 4, we only have 2 options really. Play Arcolano Milk, followed by Wukong, or Arcolano Milk plus the 2 cards from our hand. In any case, I could have just run out the milk to the companion side first, but in the game I didn't realize that, so I committed to the second plan right away, playing the Icebound Peak. Our opponent shows off a new card here, and one that I personally am very excited about for Akesha, Daring Porter. Originally an Axiom card, with an out of faction going to Izmir. For 3 mana, you get decent stats, and most importantly, an exhausted resupply, both from hand and from reserve. Card advantage is an essential part of wannabe control decks, so this is a very exciting new character for Izmir. The resupply is Small Step Giant Leap, and if you've watched my video on Akesha, you know this is an essential card for her. She won't be able to make use of it for some time still, but nonetheless I felt that this was a more attractive target for our Sabotage than the 4 mana Off You Go. Naturally, if I had the option, I would love to save our Tooth Fairy and play Wukong here, since Akesha's reserve will be overloaded after this round, forcing her to basically do the Sabotage for us, and then we'd have the Tooth Fairy to sabotage the Daring Porter next round. But sadly, we don't have a feasible way to do that without conceding a progression. So I played out the milk, setting up for the Buddha token coming in next round, while hoping to snatch the hero side with Tooth Fairy. That plan ends up working, as Akesha just passes, so I sabotage the small step, and we trade expeditions once again to make the total score 2-3 in her favor. Our hand being empty at the start of the round 4 is not very pleasant. Now we've drawn 2 copies of Hua Mulan, and suddenly we really feel the effects of downgrading this card to common rarity, since now she costs 3, which makes her much less flexible to use. So Wukong plus Mulan is not an option here. We only really have Wukong plus Tooth Fairy, which does look pretty good though. Note that playing one of these cards from reserve will trigger the first of our Icebound Peaks to flip. However, should we play both, we'll even flip the second one as well, which is probably overkill for this round and would be a waste of resources. In that sense, maybe the best line of play here is Hua Mulan plus Tooth Fairy. In any case, I start with the Tooth Fairy because I was worried that might get sabotaged or exhausted or otherwise indisposed, making use of the Arcolano Milk on the left for an additional boost, and flipping the Icebound Peak. With the additional boost for the entire team that this incoming dragon provides, we're presenting 6s on the left and 7s on the right. A very respectable board that Akesha cannot easily zigzag around. Of course, she does have the option to use Off You Go to kill the dragon, but that leaves her with only 2 mana, not enough for another round of Daring Porter, so I'm honestly okay with that line. Our opponent seems to agree that it's important to get the second resupply from Porter, so they go for a line without Off You Go, instead taking the opportunity to play their own Icebound landmark, Icebound Pass, the Izmir version of that cycle. This one collects counters when you exhaust cards in reserve, but note that this doesn't only mean opponent's reserves. Getting an exhausted resupply yourself with a card like Porter also counts, since they're also exhausting a card in reserve. Now, for us, there's no harm here in playing out Mulan, making absolutely sure that our left side doesn't get cleared by some sort of removal, and getting this Mulan into our reserve. Our Akesha opponent runs out the Porter, even though it doesn't contest the expedition, simply to trigger that exhausted resupply, which gives them a Tooth Fairy, a very fortunate result for us. With that, we score a double progression of the power spike from our Icebound Peak, all according to our deck building plan. And going into the next round, we draw Haven Seiringar and Bravo's Tracer. This is a bit of a tricky position. On one hand, we want to put a card into the mana here to have enough to play both Wukong and Mulan from reserve. On the other hand, it is pretty likely that either one of those cards will get sabotaged or exhausted, in which case we look very silly with just the one card in hand. But given that our opponent's deck so far has been more about exhausting their own cards rather than my cards, and also given that we already see one of the 3 Tooth Fairies, I decided it was worth the risk here, so I benched Tracer. Akesha starts with After You, which is a very good sign for us because it shows that they do not have a sabotage ready, and I run out Wukong, who enters as a 4/6/4 and also triggers Icebound Peak, giving us the Dragon Shade and further boosting Wukong. Unfortunately, there's no way for us to avoid having this dragon immediately removed by the opponent's Off You Go, but at least that's 4 of their mana gone and we can still play Mulan. The thing is, Mulan is weak in Forest, which is the only stat we need on the left side currently. So I felt it was better to put her on the right as well. This obviously gives our opponent an easy way to trade expeditions with just a Tooth Fairy from reserve here, but I felt that was still fine for us since we're in the lead. Our opponent decides to take us up on that offer, but not with a Tooth Fairy exactly. Instead, they play another Daring Porter and supply a Baba Yaga. That seems a bit silly on first glance, since now they'll have to discard something from reserve, but on the plus side, they did get an additional counter on the Icebound Pass, so they will probably be able to flip that next turn. And with us having cut the mana eruptions from the deck, we have no way of preventing that, unfortunately. So we end up trading, and now a double progression would close out the game for us, but that seems very unlikely at this point. Our draws are Haven Bouncer, a very welcome sabotage card, and an Arcolano Milk. I benched the Haven Seiringar, which puts us on 8 mana for this round, potentially allowing for Bouncer plus Milk plus Wukong, in addition to the Buddha token we get as well. All in all, we're looking at a pretty potent round for us here. Or so I thought. In reality, this is the round where everything started falling apart for us completely out of the blue. I play the Bouncer right away, of course, getting rid of the additional resupply provider for our opponent and also taking away their prime way of flipping Icebound Path, all in one 3-mana character. But here, Akesha hits us with a new card from Trial by Frost that really packs a punch and that I can't wait to try myself, the Nilam, Withered Tree. It's a landmark that rewards you for exhausting cards in reserve by giving you a 2/2/2 Moth whenever you exhaust a card in reserve for the first time each round. But also, and this is crucial, it triggers itself, because you get to exhaust one card when you play this. And guys, if you've ever played Sierra or any other such deck, you know that for value-generating permanents like this, it is an incredible upgrade if they do something right away on the turn they're played. This is what sets apart Brassback Hive from all the other permanents that, for example, Ordis has to offer, like the Monolith, which doesn't do anything when you play it. But with this Nilam, our Akesha opponent is able to exhaust our Wukong in reserve, which triggers Nilam, tapping it, and creating a Moth which fully counters our Bravo's Bouncer, and the reserve card being exhausted also puts the third counter on Icebound Pass, flipping it into a 5/5/5 dragon to completely dominate our Buddha token, while also drawing our opponent a card. All of this for 4 mana, on a landmark that will continue to produce these Moths probably every round. It's incredible. And if you look at how we fit into all of this, you quickly realize that we have just completely lost this round. Our Mulan is not enough to seriously contest any side, given that our opponent still has 4 mana open. So my only option here was to play the Arcolano Milk to at least threaten to win the right side, which forces our opponent to commit the Baba Yaga there. But to add insult to injury, Akesha doesn't even need to do that right now, because she can slow play this round one more time with a magical training from hand. Now, there's a slight error in the slides here. The next slide shows us passing, which is obviously wrong. I played the Mulan here to the left side, which puts us to 4 in Forest, and our opponent naturally is forced to commit the Baba Yaga there as discussed, meaning that they'll win both expeditions here, and we'll end up with this board state. Having to discard something from reserve, but yep, you guessed it, it doesn't even matter anymore. Because Akesha has reached that infamous point her deck tries to get to. She only needs one more progression. So as her next play, she'll slam her signature card, Small Step Giant Leap, and win the game immediately. So here she just revealed it from her hand, and it was clear we didn't need to play out the rest of the match. Incredible. We were doing so well, heading into another absolutely cracked round for us, and all of a sudden this Nilam triggers an avalanche of value that completely leaves us in the dust and allows Akesha to instantly win the game 1 round later. Very impressive showing from this new Trial by Frost version of the Akesha Zigzag deck, and I can't wait to try it myself. GG. So there you have it, folks. 2 cool games with this Bravos fleeting / recursion from the reserve / anime protagonists deck. Icebound Peak is a really cool card that you should definitely try out, and based on my extensive testing, I feel confident to say that this is the deck list you should do it with. To recap the slight changes we tried out in the second game, we replaced these 3 mana eruptions with Twinkle Twinkle, which unfortunately also forced us to downgrade one of the rares to common. I picked Mulan for this, and overall I have to say, I'm not convinced it's worth it. First of all, while the common Mulan does have better stats, it also costs 3 instead of 2, which is a very noticeable increase. And although I know I'd rather be playing the rare mana eruptions instead of these common ones because the cost reduction is so sweet, I don't think completely cutting them is the way to go. So my recommendation would be to stick to the version of the deck you're seeing here. The only possible change I think could be interesting is to trim these Tooth Fairies, because that would free up some much desired rare slots for the deck if you're willing to go down on the sabotage effects. Concerning uniques, it's kind of a similar idea. I would recommend uniques of any character that's rare in this version, because the commons are all half decent, and playing uniques instead of these rares would allow you to upgrade Mana Eruption. Guys, that was my take on how to play my favorite hero, Kojo, in the new set. Obviously, you also still have the other options from before, namely the Foundry Kojo style, which is super fun to play and got a cool new card in the Little Match Girl, and the Big Red style of ramping into all these badass Bravos top-end characters. Although it is feasible that with the new set, Azadi may actually be playable for that strategy now. I've made separate videos for both of these deck archetypes already here on the channel, so check them out if you're interested. Guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the deck and the gameplay. Do tell me in the comments what your experiences with the new set are and what new strats to look out for. As always, I hope you're having a great day wherever you are, and I'll see you in the next one.